All right, welcome back everyone. In this video, we're going to get into equations, which I know is exactly why you joined a sales class, but three quick, simple, very closely related equations are actually all you need to know to understand the very basics of the sales process. Everything else is going to be digging into the individual pieces of these equations just a little bit more. And one of them is incredibly common. So, any sales training that you do anywhere is almost certainly going to include some riff of a version of this. And that is an equation, some kind of representation of this idea of customer perceived value, right? So, what is it when you are talking to your customer about whatever it is that you are selling, whatever it is that you are promoting and hoping that people will purchase or otherwise support, right? Depending on what kind of sales you are in. This customer perceived value is all about thinking through okay, what are the ways that I maximize how valuable the person that I am trying to influence or the entity that I am trying to influence finds what it is that I am selling. And so, what do you expect that this equation might look like? Pretty simple indeed. Two pieces: perceived benefits and perceived costs. Now, there's an interesting thing to keep in mind here, which is it's not just benefits minus costs, right? It's perceived benefits and perceived costs. Now, we have some expectation that when people are making sales decisions, when they're making purchasing decisions, when you're asking someone to part with their money, that people are perfectly rational, that they're going to kind of do the math, do some kind of calculation and figure out, what is this going to cost me long-term monetarily? What is the short-term cost? And do the calculus, figure out whether or not it works. It's not calculus, right? It's just simple arithmetic. Do the simple arithmetic, figure out whether or not this balances out in their favor. But this perception word here is really important, right? What that tells us is that these are not rational, perfect spreadsheet, hive mind calculations that people are making. We're working with human beings with our flawed human brains, and that means that it's a little bit more about perception, about some of these kind of like softer, subtler, more psychological concerns. Certainly there's a role for the cold, rational, I'm going to do the math approach to this, but that's not the entirety of it. And it's really important to note here that I'm not saying, in a business to consumer context, this is the case. In a business to business context, this is the case. In a case where you are selling to true experts, it is still very much the case that these perceptions matter, these perceived benefits and these perceived costs. Okay, now backing way up and just breaking down the nuances of this individual equation, perceived benefits minus perceived costs, that's the value. Important to keep in mind, though, that perceived word is there in this initial equation. So customer perceived value, customer value equation, this is like fundamental bedrock to sales. But if you think about what is important to the salesperson at the end of the day, and I'm talking to you kind of early in the class as prospective salespeople, later in the class, we're going to talk about all of these things with me more assuming that you're a sales manager, but regardless of which role you're in, what are you interested in? Are you interested in maximizing the customer's perceived value on a day-to-day basis? Not really. What is the salesperson interested in? The salesperson, and often the sales manager, wants to maximize customer perceived value, but you want to maximize it because what you're interested in is the probability of a sale. And this probability of a sale thing is something that you're going to hear me talk a lot about. Not just the 0 and 1, 0, 1, did I make a sale for each individual instance. One of the main issues that people run into when entering careers in sales or when managing salespeople is this idea that you've got to approach it as a long game, right? Individual sales are important, but there's going to be situations in which you do everything right and you don't make the sale at the end of the day. And you've got to just expect that you're going to have some of these patterns over time, some of these inconsistent relationships between the amount of effort and the amount of preparation that you put in and the result in any kind of one shot of one of these games. Over time, what you want is that winning season. Over time, what you want is a winning record. Over time, what you want is to be a proven effective salesperson. but over time is important there. Okay, so what we care about though is the probability of a sale. Over time, we want to increase our probability of a sale. So instead of thinking just about customer perceived value and leaving it there, because that's not going to be what's most motivating to a salesperson or a sales manager, let's think about probability of a sale. And if we put it in these terms, what impacts the probability of a sale? Well, here's the kind of bummer side of this, and that is that if the perceived benefit, the customer's perceived benefit, if the customer's perceived benefit is less than the customer's perceived cost, your probability of a sale is 0. End. Full stop. Game over. You lose. That's it. If, on the other hand, you get the perceived benefit to be greater, ideally, or equal to perceived cost, that's where you at least enter the world in which the probability of a sale is greater than or equal to 0. So at a minimum, you have to put yourself in this position. At a minimum, in order to have any chance of success, right? According to this, 0 probability of a sale is still on the board here. But in order to put yourself in this realm, you have to, at a minimum, make sure that the customer's perceived benefit is greater than or equal to the customer's perceived cost. So then let's take a big step back and imagine that you are entering your very first sales job, or maybe you're already in your very first sales job, or maybe you're in your third sales job, I don't know. And you're sitting there thinking to yourself one of the most fundamental questions in all of sales. Okay, so what do I got to do? What do I got to do to increase the probability of a sale here? What are the things that are going to matter? And really go through this exercise with yourself. Think through what all of those things are, and then sort through, okay, which of those things are related to perceived benefits? Which of those things are related to perceived costs? I want you to pause this video. If you're in the class and you're watching this video right now, this is going to be something that I ask you to submit to me, so you might as well really go through this exercise, thinking through, okay, yeah, I can use these equations that at first seem like mindless time filler to start to organize some of my thinking around these things. And then the next thing I want you to ask yourself is, okay, so I know that at a minimum, I want to spend my time as a salesperson in this place, and this perceived benefits are at least greater than or equal to perceived cost, so that my probability of making a sale is at least greater than or equal to 0. And there's two things you can do. Two things you can focus on. You can focus on things that are perceived as costs and minimizing those costs. So the thing that, most naturally comes to mind when you did this exercise, the thing that for most people is going to show up very first, top of mind, is, okay, well, price. Yeah, I can lower the price. That's one of the things that I can do to increase the probability of a sale. Is that the best thing to do? Sometimes, but not nearly as often as the ease with which it comes to mind might suggest, right? And so really what separates a good salesperson from a not so great salesperson is the extent to which you can easily and naturally and effectively come up with strategies to increase that perceived benefit over time, to work on that side of the equation here. Not to say that perceived costs aren't important, particularly if we're talking about things like communicating to a customer potentially how the customer's perceived costs over time by purchasing your product are going to be less. But if as a salesperson, the very best strategy that you have in your pocket at all times when interacting with a customer is to come to your sales manager or to use whatever leverage that you've kind of been given to enter a sales scenario and say to yourself, all right, well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try lowering the price. I'm going to try lowering the price, see whether or not that can get me into this realm and start to move us towards closing a sale. I don't know that you're doing a great job of earning your paycheck and communicating to your organization or to yourself or to the consumer what your role as a salesperson is in this scenario. You need to be bringing value to this entire exchange, and that's to your organization, to the entity that you're working for, and also to the customer. simply having access to you, if you want to be a well-compensated, a well-trained, respected salesperson, simply having access to you and your expertise and your ability to smooth and ease this process, that should be increasing the value right off the bat, right? And so really focusing on this perceived benefit area is going to be what separates, is not going to be, it is what separates really good, skilled salespeople who demonstrably pay for themselves over time from not so great salespeople. Anything else is just commodity sales, right? If you're just going to compete on price at the end of the day and that's the best you got, call it commodity sales and be done and just compete on price. So that's it. That's our intro to the kind of very typical sales equation, and then the format of this that I find slightly more motivating and intuitive for people who are actually working in sales, whether that's the actual selling side or the sales management side. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks, everybody.